This is the second part of a code walkthrough for Array1DIntsClass.java. We've already taken a look at this file as a whole and all its methods. Now we'd like to demonstrate the execution of its main method test code. But this is a rather lengthy main method, and it's really kind of a bear to go through it with the debugger. So I'm going to pull a little trick here. What I've done in this code is I've sprinkled lots of these pause statements inside the code to sort of stop the execution so we can look at the results. And this pause method, in a nice little trick, this is a simple method I added at the end of this file, and it simply calls the utils file readString. It pretends that it's reading a string from the command line using scanner, but then it simply drops that input to the ground and does nothing with it. So this method emulates a pause in the execution of our file. And that's what I'm going to use here to go through this main method. So let me position the main method so we can see it. Compile this code as always. I'll clear this and I'll start running and see how it pauses the execution right here. So what we're doing is we're setting up three different Array1DIntsClass objects using the three constructors: a default constructor with size 10, a specific size constructor with size 2, and one where it's initialized to some array of integers. Then in this first chunk of code, we're demonstrating the use of these three utility methods to get the size, the use size, and whether there's room to add. So in this first default object, it's of size 10. There's no array elements used, so there is room to add. So that takes us to this code right here. In these next ones, we're simply checking if the index 2 is a valid index. Because there are no elements in this array, element 2 is not a valid index, so it comes out as false. So the only valid index to be had is a -1, which indicates there's nothing in the array. So now we're at this pausing point. In this next set of instructions, we're checking in the object A3 if 2 is a valid index. And because it has several elements, that is a valid index. Now we are prompting for another valid index, and that's what this output here is doing. So we've got these 5 elements, and we're prompting for a valid index. And if I put in some garbage like element 8, it's going to keep dogging me until I enter a proper index. So let's say index 4, and that is a valid index, and we'll pause. Next, we're looking at the toString display method applied to each one of these array objects implicitly. So that will give us these outputs. These are all the current values in a comma separated format. That brings us to this next pause. Then we'll check the prints for all of these, and that's going to give us something that looks like this. We're going to echo the size, the use size, and if there's room to add. So in this array of 10, nothing's being used, so we can update any of these array elements. In this element, we've got 2 elements, nothing's being used, so there's room to add. In this array, we've got 5 elements. We're using all 5, so there's no room to add. Result is false. So that's what our print methods are going to look like for these array objects. In this next set of statements, we're going to test the nominal mutators, and we're going to add the value 10 to open space, and then we're going to print out this array object. So there's the 10 that we added. Then we're going to update this array using an array we defined at the head of our file, and that gives us this updated output. We've set the values to 100 and 200, and that just demonstrates using the mutator with a provided array. Next, we're going to try to update our code with some invalid indices. So for example, we're going to add a 99 to the end of our array, like we see so. Then we're going to try to add another element to the array, but now we're out of space, so now we correctly get this message that there's no room to add more elements. In these next statements, we're going to test the nominal accessors. So we're going to pull out the one element, which is this 99, and echo it out. Then we're going to test the accessors with invalid indices. So we're going to try to pull out the 2 element, but this array only has 2 elements, so there is no valid index 2, and we're going to get this error message, and it has to return something, so it's going to return the bogus 0 result. Moving forward then, we're going to test the equality of our objects. These 2 array objects are probably different, so they return a false result, but any object had better be equal to itself, so it correctly returns a true result from testing equality up here. Next, we're going to echo out the current state of the A2 array object. It looks like this, and we're prompting to update an element. So it's echoing out what the current elements are, and it's prompting us for an array index. So again, if we enter some bogus array indices, it'll keep dogging us for a valid index. So until we enter, say, array index 1, and we'll update that to 42. And if we echo out the array object now, we see that our 42 has been inserted into the array. So our next set of changes is to use this increment element, and it's also going to prompt us for the index and the value. So this is what our array looks like now, and I'm going to specify the 1 index, and I'm going to increment it by, let's say, 8, so its result should be 50, and it correctly is 50, and that takes us to the end of this main method. So in all of this main method test code, we've exercised all of the capabilities we've added, and we've made it a little easier to watch the execution by entering all of these pause commands into the flow of execution of that test code. This is a trick that you can use when you're setting up your own objects, and the code to do that is found right here at the end of this 1D array class.